My name is Charles. I'm 72 years old. I've been a widower for 6 years, and I learned to speak shortly after I realized that those who listen don't always really listen. But today, I'm going to talk. And before you call me dramatic, I just ask you one question. Have you ever been humiliated by someone you once helped to raise? I went. And it wasn't a criticism, nor a fight. It was worse. It was a joke disguised as a compliment, said in that tone that seems light, but carries poison. "You have a way for the plumber," he said, laughing, after he saw me fixing the yacht's faucet. The yacht he thought was rented, the yacht that, in his mind, an old man like me could never have. But this story is not just about a broken faucet. It's about broken respect, about how some people only see value in what shines, and they forget who built everything with their own hands. If you've ever felt invisible, used, or diminished by those who should thank you, this video will tell you something you might need to hear, because when the truth came out, it was his face that flowed, not tap water. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. That day, when my son-in-law looked at me with that little smile and said that I had a knack for being a plumber, he didn't imagine that the faucet I repaired was just the fuse. What he also didn't know was that the yacht where he mocked me had been paid in cash. What's more, it was about to be given to him and my daughter as a gift of a lifetime. But the way they treated me that weekend transformed what would be a gesture of love in a lesson. And it was there, between the sound of the water running down and the silence of the unspoken words, that everything began to change. If you've ever experienced something similar, if you've ever been looked down upon by someone who should look at you with respect, then this story is for you. And if it touches you in any way, if it echoes inside, I only ask you for one gesture. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, because telling this here is not easy. But perhaps, by counting, I will find those who also carry this pain hidden in their chest. Perhaps I find you. The idea came up on a Thursday morning while I was having coffee on the balcony and listening to the calm noise of the birds. Megan had called me the week before saying that she missed our moments before. The walks, the short trips, the time when we laughed for nothing. That kept hammering in my head for days. Maybe it was time to try, to make room for a new beginning. That's when I decided. I was going to take everyone for a special weekend, something that would mark. Not as an old man desperate for attention, but as a father who still believed that gestures are worth more than words. I chose Serenity for a reason. It was new, discreet, without ostentation, but with elegance. A boat that represented what I had become, silent on the outside but whole on the inside. I bought that yacht 6 months ago. I pay, in my name. I always dreamed of having one, but I never had the time. And when I finally did, I knew it would be my final gift to the family, something they would never forget. I planned everything in secret. I let it look like I had just rented it for the weekend. I thought it would be nice to surprise them at the end with the news. A gift of soul. I also invited George and Linda, Ethan's parents. They have always been correct with me, polite, even too elegant. I thought his presence would bring balance. George was a retired engineer, liked chess and respected silence. Linda had a permanent smile but eyes that took in everything. Unlike his son, very different. Ethan was the first to react to the invitation. "A yacht, Charles? You're going to leave your retirement at sea, is that it?" I laughed. I thought it was a joke. But his voice had a hint of provocation that only those who have been humiliated in silence can perceive. Megan looked excited. I said it would be good to get out of the routine. The grandson was going to stay with the nanny. It's going to be just us, like before. That touched me. Maybe it was true. Maybe there was still something between us. On Saturday morning, we parked at the Newport Marina. Clear skies, calm seas. It was the perfect day. We each arrived in our own car. I was already on board, organizing things. When Ethan stepped onto the deck for the first time, the comment came quickly. "Wow, this is fancier than I imagined." The video store really did a great job. Megan laughed, a little embarrassed. I just smiled. The pain started there, small, but live. He didn't stop there. Every corner of the boat was a reason for mockery. Who chose this dark wood? It feels like a funeral. This bathroom here is so small that you can only fit rich people in it. George tried to deflect the subject. Linda praised the sunset. Megan spoke little, but everyone listened. At lunch, sitting at the deck table, Ethan remarked loudly, "Exaggerated, old man. I could have rented a boat and it would have been a luxury." No one laughed, but no one said anything either. The omission sometimes hurts more than the insult. I looked at Megan. She fiddled with her napkin as if it wasn't up to her. My heart tightened. I thought, is that the price you pay for trying to do good? The truth is that we only know the size of a person's respect when she thinks you have nothing left to offer. I'm sorry to interrupt a little here, but I want to ask a question to you who are listening to me now. Have you ever done something with affection, with good intentions, and been treated as if you were just wanting to show off? Have you ever tried to please and been ridiculed for it? If so, comment below with a "I've lived it" or with a "It's true." Not because of the video, but because I need to know that I'm not the only one who felt it. We feel less alone when we share pain with those who understand. I go back to that afternoon. The crew helping me on board knew of my plan. They treated me with respect. They called me Mr. Whitmore, even though I asked not to formalize it so much. But Ethan thought he was above everyone. He spoke as if he were the owner, as if he were doing himself a favor by being there. Before dinner, I went to prepare a coffee. As I adjusted the coffee maker, I heard Ethan say to Megan, loud enough for all to hear, "Do you really think he paid for all this? He must have made some agreement, or spent what they don't have." Megan replied with a muffled giggle. My daughter, the girl I raised to have a voice. Now I was silent when my husband diminished me, but I still believed. I still thought that, with time and calm, that weekend could turn the key. It was just the beginning, I said to myself. They will still understand. You will still see what this means. They will still know who is behind all this. What I didn't know is that the kitchen faucet, the one Ethan would later see me fix, would be the fuse. But was it really her? Or what did he carry inside his chest? Because sometimes what breaks is not what is in sight. It's respect. And that's exactly when everything started to get out of control. When they arrived at the pier, it was still early. The sun was shining Serenity's white hull, and the water reflected a golden glow that made everything look like a movie. I was there, leaning against the railing on the upper deck, watching the scene. Ethan was the first to approach. He wore a backwards cap, his shirt unbuttoned in the first two buttons, and that posture of someone who believes that everything around him is a scenario for his own ego. He looked around with a slanted smile, and the first sentence he uttered was, "Impressive. These luxury rentals are increasingly well done. It almost deceives." I just nodded, as if I hadn't heard. Megan behind him pretended to fiddle with her cell phone, avoiding crossing eyes with me. That already told me more than any words. As soon as he stepped on board, Ethan began to circle as an inspector. He ran his hand over the wood on the deck, looked at the details of the cockpit, poked the seats inside. "Mr. Organizer of expensive tours, huh?" he said out loud while laughing to himself. Then he turned to me and spoke in that tone between irony and contempt. "Who knew you still had that jovial spirit, almost looking rich?" Linda arrived last with George. They greeted me with a hug. "Charles, the boat is beautiful," she said sincerely. "It's impressive indeed," added George, looking around with the eyes of someone who understands the value of things. It was comforting, if brief. I took everyone to see the environments. I showed the master suite, the gourmet area, the navigation compartments. Ethan cracked a joke at every turn. "Sleeping here must cost more than my mortgage." "How many installments did you make to make it through this weekend, huh, Charles?" Megan didn't say anything. She smiled out of the corner of her mouth, as if all that was normal, as if I should accept it. But I felt it. Each word hurt as if it had been scratching an open wound. And as much as I smiled back, inside I began to stiffen. Not because of the offense, but because of the realization that he didn't see who I was. To him, I was just an old man who was playing at being somebody. I prepared a cheese board and opened a Spanish wine that I kept for special occasions. I put on soft ambient music and tried to create a light mood. Linda sat next to me, grateful. George was delighted with the onboard equipment and asked me questions about the panels. Ethan picked up the wine glass and said, "Ah, imported wine. I hope you left money for health insurance after this weekend, Charles." His laughter echoed through the room. I kept quiet, fiddling with the cheese. If I answered, I lost. And I learned that sometimes silence is the best way to let the other expose themselves. At one point, he approached the yacht's control panel, touched the buttons as if he knew what he was doing, and said, This is pure luxury. It must cost a fortune. It almost makes it look like it's yours, huh? I looked at him, and for the first time that day, I stared deeply. Almost. Is that it? And I turned my back. He laughed as if he had won an arm wrestling. But those who know the sea know. Calm does not mean surrender. Sometimes it's just a warning that the tide is going to turn. In the evening, when the sky grew darker and the marina lights came on in the distance, everyone was sitting on the upper deck, enjoying the horizon. Ethan again blurted out, "It looks like a scene from a millionaire's movie. All that's left is for someone to stumble and fall into the water." Megan chuckled briefly, but added nothing. George, standing next to me, commented, "This boat has a soul, it has personality." I smiled and replied, "There are stories that haven't even started yet." And inside me I already knew. Something was coming. Because what Ethan did with words was only the reflection of what he carried in his heart. But what he didn't know, it's just that the boat had cameras, and what happened the next day when he thought he was alone in the kitchen would change everything he thought he knew about me. Have you ever imagined what it's like to see with your own eyes the person you helped trying to sabotage you from behind? Well then, that's when the truth starts to trickle out, like the water from that broken faucet. And what did I do after that? It was the part that no one saw coming. Dinner that night was carefully assembled. I even set up the mahogany table on the lower deck. I used the good dishes, those tall glasses I bought on an old trip with Margaret, when we still dreamed of growing old surrounded by noisy grandchildren. I placed a white tablecloth with navy blue details and positioned the candles calmly, as if preparing an altar. It was my way of saying, I still believe in this here. The smell of food went up the stairs lightly. It was a simple dish, but made with intention. Chicken and wine sauce, creamy rice, toasted vegetables, and, to go with it, a bottle of Californian Red that I had been saving for years. When everyone was seated, I waited for the cutlery to rest on the plates, raised my glass and said, "To the family, may we create special memories here." My voice came out firm, but inside my chest trembled. And then came the answer, quick as a slap. Family is great, especially when someone pays the bill. Ethan didn't even look me in the eye. He said that like someone throwing a bowling ball. His glass clinked when it touched mine. Megan just lowered her eyes. He stood there staring at the napkin as if it were an escape map. George coughed, uncomfortable. Linda tried to smile, saying, "We're grateful for the invitation, Charles. Everything is beautiful." But it was like throwing sugar into salt water. Ethan wasn't done yet. "Do you still have those grocery coupons you used? I remember Megan saying that at the time of insurance you were the king of discounts. I bet you still carry them in your wallet." Laughed. He laughed out loud. Megan sketched a smile that died at the corner of her mouth. I stared at my glass. Sometimes what hurts the most is not what you say. It's the silence that comes from those who should protect you. The daughter you raised to be strong now quietly watched some man mock his own father, without even blinking. I could have gotten up. I could have answered. He could have told him right then and there how much that boat cost, how I bought it, how difficult it had been to keep silent for so many years just to see it happen. But I didn't do anything. I just kept cutting the chicken on the plate with slow movements. And that night, even surrounded by people, I felt completely alone. No. Silence weighs differently when you realize that you are not welcome where you have always been based. It's like walking into your own house and seeing that they've changed the locks. After dinner, while everyone went up to the upper deck to see the lights of the marina, I stayed downstairs, collecting the plates, folding the napkins, cleaning up what's left. It was as if I were the employee of a dinner that I had prepared myself. When I climbed, Ethan already had a glass of whiskey in his hand and his feet resting on the safety wall. He talked about investments, about the value of the market, about how difficult life was for those who didn't know how to position themselves. And I was there, the man who paid for his college, who checked in at the house in Costa Mesa, who held the ends when his grandson was born, and the two were swamped with bills. But those who look from the outside only see a silent old man fixing things. The night went on with jokes, blank smiles, and my daughter disappearing more and more behind the man she chose. Linda noticed. She looked at me from the corner a few times but didn't say anything. George offered me a cigar, which I refused with a discreet smile. I didn't want to talk. I just wanted silence. But what I didn't know, it's just that the silence of that night held something deeper. Because while everyone was laughing up there, something was happening in the boat's kitchen. A small gesture disguised, but one that would reveal everything. And when I found out, that's when the faucet broke. And along with it, something inside me. But you know how to recognize when they are trying to sabotage you, even when they smile in front of you? Because I found out, and it was at that moment that my memory stopped being just a memory, and it became a test. After dinner, with the noise of conversations going up to the deck and the smell of whiskey mixing with the sea air, I went down alone to the kitchen. I wanted to prepare a coffee. I've always had this habit, end the night with something hot, as if trying to warm up inside. I turned on the soft light in the kitchen, stirred the cups, and went to the sink. When I turned the faucet, I was startled. The valve turned too much, the base was loose, and the water came out like a jet, splashing everywhere. He wet my arm, wet the floor. But what chilled me, it was the detail. I had checked that faucet myself that morning. He was firm, nova, intact. Do you know when instinct speaks louder than thought? At that moment, something inside me closed. It was not a defect. It was a touch of a malicious hand, and I knew where it came from. I took a deep breath. I dried my arm with the tea towel and went to the boat's safety panel. It is hidden behind a wooden compartment on the side of the service stairs. I typed the password slowly. The cameras cover everything, deck, kitchen, corridors. I reviewed the recordings of the last minute, and there he was, Ethan, alone in the kitchen, searching the emergency box that is in a compartment under the countertop. He removed the pliers, he bent down, and with precise movements he forced the base of the faucet until it broke the fixation. Then he looked around. He put away the pliers. He washed his hands, and it did, as if nothing. I watched the scene with a coldness that surprised me. I didn't feel angry, nor shock. I felt a kind of old tiredness, of the soul. So that's it, that echoed deep in his chest. I went back to the tape. I paused at the moment when he smiles alone, as if thinking he did something smart. I saved that passage on a small pen drive that I always carry in my pocket, along with a photo of my Margaret. I kept everything. I turned off the panel. I went up with the coffee. No one noticed my time off. I handed over the cups, sat in the usual chair. Ethan accepted the coffee naturally, as if he had done nothing, as if it were just another ordinary night. Megan was entertained with her cell phone. George and Linda were commenting something about the brightness of the sea, and I was there watching my son-in-law drink the coffee I prepared. In the kitchen, he sabotaged it. It was at that moment that something changed in me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt free. Because now it wasn't just pain or impression. It was proof. It was an image. It was a fact. And when the truth becomes an image, there is no going back. I'm here opening my heart, telling my story with all the open wounds. If you're listening, if it's messing with any memory of yours, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. I still have a lot of things in store to tell you. Stories that hurt, but teach. Stories like this. That night, I was the last to sleep. I stayed on deck, listening to the sound of the waves crashing lightly on the hull. I looked up at the sky and thought of Margaret. I thought about what she would have said if she had seen what happened. You need to act, Charles, but with its strength, with your calm. And that's what I decided to do. I wasn't going to scream, nor argue, but I was going to show it. It was going to turn the tide, at the right time, and with the exact weight. What I did the next morning, no one expected it, especially him, because the coffee he had that night, it was the last sip of peace before the storm, and when the day dawned, it was there that the tables turned. Can you guess how? Because what was to come, it would still silence even those who laughed too loudly. The next morning, before anyone woke up, I went down to the kitchen with the sun still rising outside. The Newport sky was painted that light orange of the beginning of the day, and only the sound of the water hitting the hull kept me company. I grabbed my tools, opened the sink cabinet, and stared at the damaged faucet. It was fast service, about 15 minutes, but I did it slowly. Each turn of the wrench was a memory that came back, and it wasn't good nostalgia. It was old pain that was now beginning to make sense. I remembered the check for $60,000 I gave to Megan and Ethan when they bought their house in Costa Mesa. Dad, it's just for entry, we take care of the rest, she said. But I was the one who took over, for months. I remembered her MBA in San Diego. I sold part of my old shares to bankroll. It wasn't even requested. I offered, from the heart. And the day Ethan crashed his car, a rented Mustang he took to impress investors, and I was the one who paid the medical costs and damages. Megan was pregnant at the time. I just wanted to avoid further tension. Vacation travel then. I was always the one who paid for everything. Orlando, Boston, Lake Tahoe. They only showed up with their bags packed. And me, with the card in my pocket. For years I was told I was part of it, that I was the mainstay of the family. Today I understand. I was the ATM who knew how to make coffee. Ethan kept saying that I was good, but naive. Once, making small talk on the porch, he said, "You don't understand how the world works today. You have to know how to take advantage of things." And he laughed. He laughed out loud, like someone who prides himself on his own coldness. Well, now I understand. I understand everything. I understand the price of silence. I understand the value of ingratitude. And I understand the weight of being too good with those who just want to take off. The faucet has returned to its place. Firm, aligned, better than it was. I got up, washed my hands, wiped it on the cloth Margaret gave me years ago, still with her initials embroidered on the corner. I looked around. No one there. All still sleeping or taking pictures on the upper deck. The smell of the sea came through the hatch. And there, alone, I understood that fixing that faucet wasn't about plumbing. It was about fixing myself. It was about not letting their dirt leak more into my heart. But what they didn't know, it's just that while they were taking pictures smiling, I was preparing the quietest and most fair scene this family has ever seen. And that same morning, without raising my voice, I was going to make it clear. It's not because I kept silent that I didn't see, and what I revealed at breakfast left everyone silent, even him, especially him. That Sunday, the sun had barely set in the sky when the first footsteps began to sound on the deck. Ethan appeared excited, sunglasses on his face, already with a glass of juice in his hand. He greeted his in-laws with that sweet tone that he only wore when he wanted to impress. "Good morning, George. Beautiful. Did you sleep well? Today the sea is in the mood of a princess, huh?" They smiled. George even reciprocated with a joke. Ethan laughed, full of teeth. It was another man. With them he was charming. A model son-in-law. Considerate, kind. He watched me from the side, but only addressed me when it was inevitable. And even so, always with that poison well diluted. "Charles, I think you should avoid the cockpit. Your pressure may not like these modernities very much." Smiled. No one laughed. He drank another sip and went back to fawning over his in-laws. Megan appeared soon after, her hair tied up in a low bun, in the same light blue blouse that Margaret gave her on an old Christmas. That squeezed me. Maybe by memory. Maybe by irony. He sat next to Ethan and stayed on his cell phone for a while. At one point, I approached with 2 mugs of coffee. I handed her one. I sat next to him. We were silent for a few seconds, until she, without facing me, blurted out, "Dad, you know Ethan's got a kind of impulsive, but deep down he likes you." I didn't say anything. I just looked at her. I stared at her as if she were someone else. And maybe it was. The girl I raised to have an opinion was now a woman who cringed in front of comfort. It was easier to protect the fragile peace of marriage than to acknowledge the injustice of the father being ridiculed. Megan didn't see me, not really. He saw me as a burden, as someone who could be left in the background, as long as the noise avoided was greater than the shame of being silent. The pain there was different. It wasn't anger. It was a loss. I lost my daughter without her leaving, and that hurts more than goodbye. Meanwhile, Ethan was distributing sympathy. He helped George with the fishing stuff, praised Linda's elegance, made magazine jokes with the crew. He was the perfect son-in-law until he turned to me. Then it became another. He ignored me, cut me off, made it seem like I was just the old man who showed up with borrowed money. It didn't even seem like it was my hand that held his at the hospital door when he crashed the car. It didn't even seem like I stopped traveling with Margaret to pay for the course he wanted to take. The difference in treatment was so stark that even Linda noticed. During lunch, she asked me quietly, "Charles, is everything okay between you?" I just shook my head. "Everything great, Linda, as always." She looked at me as if she understood. He did not insist. The truth is that weekend, I saw much more than I expected. I saw my daughter slipping through her fingers. I saw my son-in-law revealing himself completely. And I saw how much my presence no longer caused respect, but embarrassment. There was a moment later that I will never forget. I was sitting near the helm watching the sea. Ethan passed by with the camera in hand, filming Megan laughing. When he saw me, He pointed the lens in my direction, laughed, and said, "And here, our retired captain. Look there, guys. The person responsible for this improvised luxury cruise." He laughed. He laughed like someone who makes fun of a child trying to play with grown-ups. And Megan? Megan looked at me and deflected. He deviated as if he were ashamed of what he carries in his blood. At that moment, I understood that certain wounds don't bleed. They hide behind beautiful words and polite smiles, but they corrode all the same. And let me tell you something, looking you in the eye, even if you're only listening to me on the other side, if you thought this story hurt so far, stay with me, because the most memorable moment was yet to come. It's time to settle. That silence speaks louder, because when the truth came out, it wasn't a scream. It was a mirror, and what Ethan saw there, he does not forget it to this day. Can you imagine what happened when his mask fell in front of everyone? So get ready, because at the next breakfast, no one could swallow anything, not even coffee, nor the shame. The dawn arrived cold and silent, the way only the sea can offer. The breeze that passed through the cracks in the deck brought a smell of salt and change. I couldn't sleep. There was something inside me that didn't want to be silent anymore. I got up slowly with that care of someone who has become accustomed to not bothering, even when he has every right to exist. I walked down the yacht's hallway in silence, with the emergency lights on, casting long shadows on the walls. The boat was sleeping, but inside me, something woke up. I sat in the navigation room, the same one where I practiced my first commands months ago. I turned the security system back on. I reviewed the recording of the sabotage on the tap. Ethan, head down, eyes calculating, hand steady on the pliers. That didn't leave my head. I paused the video, came back. I paused again. It was like I was trying to understand. At what point does a man lose respect for the one who once reached out? I copied the file to my pen drive. I put it in my pants pocket. I closed my eyes for a moment. Next to the panel was a small safe, disguised in the wood of the wall. I typed in the password, opened it carefully. I took the deed from Serenity. It was there, folded between insurance papers, invoices, and the original letter from the shipyard. Letterhead, prominent printed name, Charles A. Whitmore. That was the last gift I was going to leave them. But a gift should not be given to those who do not know the value of the gesture. I held the paper with both hands. I stood there looking for a few minutes. Then I looked up at the cabin's sunroof. The sky was clear, studded with stars. I whispered, "Margaret, you would have warned me. You would have looked at me with that look that only you had, and made me retreat in time." It was at that moment that everything became clear. The yacht would no longer be present, not for those who see kindness as weakness, and there would be no screaming, no scene, no quarrel, because whoever screams loses, but who waits, choose the right moment, and I knew he was coming. I went back to the cabin. I lay down slowly, and I slept like I hadn't slept in a long time. A sleep without anguish, weightless, a sleep of those who have finally understood that silence can be more deafening than any word spoken. No, there are times in life when we don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. The only thing we need, it is to stop offering what we have most precious to those who treat it as a rest. If you've ever felt this, if you've ever realized that you've given too much to those who looked at you too little, write a "I know how it is" or an "I understand you" in the comments. Not for me, but for yourself, because writing is a way to free yourself too. That night taught me more than whole years of living together, and when the next day dawned, I already knew what I was going to do, and the way I did it. No one saw it coming, because to turn the tables, sometimes it is enough to pull out a single chair. But can you imagine his face when the truth came out? Because for breakfast, even the smell of bread burned, and it was not by chance. I woke up before the sun, not because he was anxious, but because for the first time in a long time I knew exactly who I was inside that boat. I brewed the coffee slowly, as I have done all my life, water warming up, the smell rising, the wood on the deck creaking beneath my feet. It was curious. I felt a cold calm inside. A peace that only appears when we finally stop expecting consideration from those who never intended to offer. I was flipping the slices of bread in the pan when I heard footsteps behind me. Ethan entered the kitchen as if he owned the world. It didn't even work good morning. He leaned against the counter, snapped his fingers and let go, with that little giggle of his that always came before a humiliation. Did you survive the luxury weekend, Charles? The plumber of the time deserves a tip. The word plumber came loaded with poison, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to play with the dignity of someone older. He opened the fridge without asking permission, took a yogurt, smelled it, made a disgusted face, returned it. These rental yachts always try to look more than they are. Just like the owner of the reserve. I kept stirring the bread silently. He expected me to react. He always waited. But when we stop reacting, the aggressor is lost. I didn't give it that taste. Megan appeared soon after, with her hair tied up anyway and that sad smile she always gave when she tried to reconcile the irreconcilable. Dad, this was so special. We could repeat it, right? When we can afford it. She said this as someone who repeats something she learned from her husband, not as someone who believes in her own father. I just served the coffee. She didn't even realize what she had said, but I felt it. Every word, every distance. Linda came in next, polite as always, praised the smell, thanked the coffee. George also said good morning, touched my shoulder respectfully, as neither of them did. The couple sat serenely, talking about the weather, the sea, the seagulls. The difference in treatment was so great that it almost filled the entire deck. Ethan threw himself on the chair, tapped his spoon on the glass and said loudly, "You know, right? These boats look expensive on the outside, but on the inside, it's all a facade. Just like a lot of people out there." He played the last part looking straight at me. Megan let out a short giggle, one of those that is not even humorous. It is afraid of contradicting her husband. I served the coffee to everyone. Take it easy. First to Linda, then to George, then to Megan. When I handed the cup to Ethan, he shook and said, "You don't have to serve it like this, Charles. Have you ever made a lot of effort for someone in yours income range?" The table was frozen. Even Megan cringed. I stood near the headboard, the coffee steam rising, the sun trying to enter through the glass, all silent for a few seconds. And there, seeing those people sitting in front of me, some good, some not so good, I felt something simple, direct, almost liberating. The decision had already been made. The moment would be there, at that breakfast, with everyone watching, with everyone listening, without raising your voice, without losing his composure, because sometimes arrogance needs an audience to fall to its knees. But before I said any words, I took a deep breath. And I realized one thing. The worst was yet to come, and not through my fault. Can you imagine what happens when a man used to humiliating finally find out the truth about who he was trying to diminish? Because at that table, at that moment, I knew that it only took one sentence of mine to turn everything upside down. And that sentence, that first sentence, was about to come out of my mouth. I took a deep breath before going up to the upper deck. The sun was still low, hitting a soft diagonal that left everything with a golden glow, almost unreal. I set the table with a precision that I didn't know I still had. I cut the fruits into equal pieces, lined up the croissants that were still warm, put the white porcelain crockery that contrasted with the blue of the sea, and squeezed the orange juice right there, the way I like to do when I want to receive someone with dignity. Every detail was thought out. Every small gesture was part of something bigger. When I finished, I spent a few seconds holding the tablet, feeling the weight of it in my hand. Not the weight of the device, but the weight of the truth that was about to be revealed. I kept it behind the coffee carafe out of sight. The wind moved the napkin, and I adjusted it again. I wanted everything impeccable. Not by them. For me. I called everyone in a calm tone, one of those who admit no objection. Breakfast is served. They came without suspecting anything. George went upstairs first, praising the smell. Linda smiled, always kind. Megan came soon after, distracted on her phone. And Ethan appeared last, with that walk of someone who believes that the world moves to make room for him. As soon as he saw the table, he chuckled shortly. "Damn, Charles. It doesn't even look like rent. It was even elegant." I pulled my chair slowly, unhurriedly. Sat. I waited for everyone to settle down. Ethan was already opening his mouth to make another joke, but this time, before he let go of the first syllable, I put my hand on the table and spoke in a firm, low, controlled way, the way a man speaks when he has already made his decision. "Before we eat, I'd like to show you something I recorded yesterday afternoon." The table froze. Megan looked up slowly, as if fearing what she will hear. George frowned. Linda backed away in her chair, surprised. Ethan, he gave a crooked smile, trying to disguise his discomfort. Recorded what, Charles? The seagull stealing your bread? I didn't answer. I just took the tablet, which until then had been hidden behind the jar, and placed it on the table. I pressed the button to connect to the yacht's sound system. The large screen on the dashboard lit up, reflecting each face present. At that moment, I felt something strange. It wasn't hate. It wasn't anger. It was just clarity. That silent clarity that comes when we finally stop explaining ourselves to those who never wanted to understand. The screen loaded. Suddenly, the silence became so thick that it seemed possible to hold him between my fingers. And then, the image emerged. Ethan entering the kitchen, opening drawers that were not his, finding the toolbox, choosing the pliers. Afterwards, the video showed his hand holding the faucet tightly. Too hard. The camera captured everything. The abrupt twist. The metal giving way. The satisfied smile. The perfect sabotage. Nobody said anything. Ethan turned pale. George closed his eyes slowly, as if discovering the truth too late. Linda put her hand to her mouth. Megan seemed paralyzed. I was just looking at the screen, but not for the reasons they imagined. I didn't want to see Ethan. I wanted to see their reaction. The video continued, showing him cleaning the tracks, adjusting everything to look like an accident. When it was over, I let the silence breathe for a few seconds. The kind of silence that doesn't accuse, it only reveals. And it was at that moment, exactly at that moment, that I felt something inside me open, like a door that I had kept locked for years. I spoke softly but firmly. This is not about a tap. It's about respect. My heart was beating slowly. He wasn't even accelerated. And think, I'm here, opening up this raw part of my life with you, who is listening to me on the other side of the screen. If this piece of my story can serve as a mirror, or maybe as a hug for someone, help me move forward. Like this video, subscribe here to the channel. This makes more difference than you think and gives me the strength to keep telling the rest. Because the rest has not happened yet. The whole table was about to hear the truth behind that rental. And when I said, no one there, no one, would leave that breakfast the same. But tell me, can you imagine Ethan's expression when I finally revealed who the yacht belonged to? Because the sentence I said next, it was the one that destroyed everything he thought he knew about me. When the video ended, no one breathed for a few seconds. It was as if the air had fled from the deck. The frozen image of Ethan, hunched over the faucet, the pliers in his hand, the satisfied smile. It said more than any words could say. I just leaned back slightly in my chair, put the tablet on the table, and murmured, with the same tranquility of someone who comments on the weather, that was yesterday, 15 hours and 47 minutes. That's it. It's not an accident. My voice seemed to cross the chest of everyone there. Ethan tried to let out a short laugh, a nervous, cracked sound. Charles, for God's sake, you're exaggerating. I was just trying to help. The tap was already a little loose. I thought I could find a way. But no one reacted. His laugh died on its own, like a match that goes out before the fire is born. George was pale, staring at his son as if he were seeing a stranger. Linda put her hand to her chest, shocked, muttering something inaudible. Megan couldn't take her eyes off the faded screen, as if the image was still etched there. And it was, engraved on it, in me, in our future. I kept looking at the sea unhurriedly, without raising my tone. Sabotage the boat of an old man you believe to be weak. Is that what you call help? The question fell like a weight on the deck. Ethan shifted in his chair, trying to compose himself, trying to find some version of the story that could still save him. I got nervous, okay? The system was strange. He looked around, looking for support in the eyes of his wife, his parents, but he found only silence. And I think for the first time he realized he was alone there, truly alone. I just wanted to fix it, he insisted, but his voice trembled. I don't know. Sometimes you don't know how to deal with this equipment. I thought. I stopped looking at the sea and stared him in the face. That I wouldn't know how to perceive. Ethan blinked a few times, confused, trying to understand what part of the staging had gone wrong. But the truth was simple. There was no more staging possible. It wasn't like that. Megan finally managed to speak, her voice weak, as if trying to convince herself. Ethan, why would you do that? He opened his mouth to answer, but no sentence came. Because there was no answer. There was no logic. Only contempt. And contempt when exposed finds no words, it finds panic. I looked at Megan, and that hurt more than any sabotage, because in her eyes, I found it for the first time. Doubt. Doubt about her husband, doubt about herself, doubt about everything she believed for years. And it was at that moment, in the middle of that heavy silence, that a phrase came to my heart, so strong that I almost said it out loud. If you want to know the truth about someone, just look at how this person treats what he believes to be weak. And this part, I say to you who are there listening to me, stay with me because the most remarkable moment of this story is yet to come. It was not here that everything changed, it was later. Ethan started sweating. He ran his hand over his face. He tried another line of defense. I wanted to protect you, Charles. I thought you had rented this here with your savings. I thought that you were getting into a robbery. I muttered. Whether you know it or not, you destroyed something that wasn't yours. And he did it thinking that no one would see it. He swallowed. The silence closed around him like a circle. George fiddled with the ring, annoyed. Son, right, and this is serious. Linda shook her head in disappointment, and Megan put her hands in her lap, looking down. A small gesture, but one that said a lot. I kept calm. I always did. But there was something different inside me that morning. A firmness that didn't come from anger. It came from the truth. I'm not going to raise my voice, I said. I don't even need to. Ethan widened his eyes, realizing that something even bigger was behind it. He tried to compose himself, straighten up in his chair. Okay, you got me. I made a mistake, so what? It's just a tap. Let's follow, eat, talk like normal people. Megan whispered, How could you do that? Ethan turned to her, desperate. Meg, for God's sake, that's silly. Your father is making a storm in a teacup. I let out a slight sigh, because that was the problem after all. For him, it was always just nonsense. Just a tap, just a comment, just a mockery, just a humiliation, just an old father that he thought was too small to react. Just everything. Ethan, I said quietly, you have no idea of what you are about to hear. And that's when everyone looked up at the same time. The air was suspended, because the video had been just the beginning. What came next? I would change everything at that table, and maybe you can imagine it, or maybe not. But I ask you, have you ever seen someone lose their ground in a single second, without anyone having to touch it? That's that. This was about to happen. I spent a few seconds just watching the face of each one there. The scene seemed in slow motion. Megan still with red eyes, George trying to understand, Linda shaking her hands in her lap, and Ethan looking for some way out that just didn't exist anymore. I took a deep breath. The sea was so quiet that it seemed to listen together. And then I said, the same way I've always said my whole life. Low, calm, unhurried. Ethan, you said yesterday that this boat was a rental, that an old man like me shouldn't play at looking rich. He shifted in his chair, uncomfortable. I didn't talk like that, Charles. Yes, you did. My voice cut his like someone cutting a thread too thin to last. And even if I hadn't said it, he thought, no one dared to breathe, nor the sea. But there's one thing you don't know. I put my hands on the table and continued. This boat, it's not any rent. He blinked, confused. Megan squeezed the napkin between her fingers. George and Linda leaned forward. This boat, I repeated, is mine. The word mine seemed to cross the deck like a bell. Ethan chuckled nervously as if it were some kind of joke. Yours? Ah, Charles. You're going to tell me you collected coupons, right? Did you buy it on Black Friday? But before he finished the joke, I stood up. I walked down the side aisle to the main cabin. I opened the small safe hidden behind the panel. I got the documents. Everyone. The original deed, the insurance policy, the cash payment letter. When I returned, I brought everything in my hand. No one moved. I placed the papers on the table slowly so that each sheet hit the surface with its own sound. Ethan looked, first with disdain, then with doubt, and finally with a silent dread that he tried to hide but couldn't. Here, I said, sliding the documents toward him. Read it. Linda put her hand to her mouth. My God. Megan stood still as if she had just taken a blow she didn't expect. Dad, is that true? Signed, registered, and paid, I replied. In sight. Ethan tugged at the scripture with his fingertips as if it were too fragile to touch. His eyes swept over the page, found my name. Read. They reread it, and I saw exactly the instant when the ground fled from his feet. But, but, right, and when did you buy it? In March. And paid all this? I paid. Why? He asked this in a voice I had never heard come out of him. A small voice. Pie. Because I was going to give you this yacht today, I replied. As a gift. The silence became so heavy that even the seagulls stopped in midair. Megan brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes watering. Dad, you were going to give us this? I nodded slightly. I would. George lowered his head with emotion. Linda wiped a corner of her eye. But Ethan seemed to shrink inch by inch. He tried to smile, tried to use some kind of charm, tried to look calm, but the mask no longer fit the face. Charles, I had no idea. He didn't make a point of doing it, I replied. It never did. It was then that I realized that there are memories that are stored inside us like stones in a pocket. They weigh, sink, stay there all the time. We think we forgot, but all it takes is one wrong move, and they show the weight they have always had. Maybe you have a memory like that too. Something that marked you, that never left the place, that still hurts when you touch it. If you do, share it with me in the comments. Sometimes sharing a memory is the most beautiful way to move forward. I sat down again. I looked at Ethan. You spent days mocking me, thinking he knew who I was. He opened his mouth, but I raised my hand and he shut up. You thought I was small, that I was fragile, that I was someone easy to humiliate. Ethan tried to regain control. Charles, I was stressed. I didn't think straight. Yes, you did, I interrupted. He thought he could belittle it. Sabotage. I laughed at my face inside my boat, and all that, because he believed I was poor. Megan began to cry silently. Linda squeezed her husband's arm. Ethan ran his hands over his face, desperate. I swear that, if I knew, that's the thing, I said. If I had known, I would have feigned respect. But feigned respect is useless. The whole table looked colder. The yacht seemed bigger. The truth had entered there like a strong wind, one of those who take everything out of place. Ethan squinted, as if he wanted the world to stop spinning. Charles, we can talk, I can explain. You don't need to explain anything, I replied. I understand everything. He looked around, desperate, as if looking for an ally. He didn't find it. Megan stared at him with a mixture of sadness and incredulity. George was disappointed. Linda looked embarrassed. And I was just tired. And there, on that deck, with the documents before him and the truth illuminated by the morning sun, I knew that the time had come that I would change everything. But what was I going to say later? This was going to break the last leg of Ethan's false security. Because if he thought he had already heard the hard part, he still didn't know what was coming. What about you? Can you imagine what happens when a man who has never respected anyone discovers that he has lost something he could never get back? Because the next sentence that came out of my mouth made Ethan fall apart for good. He spent a few seconds looking at the papers, and then something inside him broke. Not the facade, not the pride, but the illusion. He rose suddenly, the chair dragging on the deck with a harsh sound as if scratching the air. "This is theater," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Nobody gives a yacht as a gift. That's a lie. That's manipulation. I held up a finger, just one, and he was silent. Not out of respect, but because he realized that he no longer controlled anything there. Megan jumped out of her chair, startled. "Ethan, stop it. Stop." But he didn't stop. He began to walk from side to side, running his hand through his hair, murmuring, trembling. "You can't just take that away from us. If you were going to give, so give it away. What's the problem? Since you are so generous, finish what you started." That phrase, it was the ultimate proof of who he was. There was no repentance, there was no humility, only right, only greed, just the belief that he had some power over me. George stood up slowly. His face, the face of a father who sees his own son transform into someone he never recognized. "Ethan, enough," he said, his voice grave, full of embarrassment. "Enough. Sit down." Ethan didn't sit down. He continued to breathe fast, like a cornered animal trying to find a way out of a labyrinth that he had built himself. Linda held my hand. A simple gesture, but it said, "I see you." I squeezed back, grateful in a way she might not have even noticed. And then Ethan did what I had hoped for, but it still hurt to see. He turned to me, his face red, his hands shaking, and said, "You can't do that, Charles, you can't. You were going to give it to us. You said you would give it. Don't change the rules now, not after making us believe." I looked at him, but this time not with regret. I looked at it as if looking at a book that has finally finished being read, and realizing that it is not worth rereading. "Ethan," I said calmly, "no gift is an obligation." He tried to cut me off, and gifts require character to be received. The phrase fell like a weight. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the sea seemed to stop for a moment. Ethan stood still, his mouth half open, his face locked in pure astonishment. It felt like the sentence had gone through his chest, hitting something he never wanted to face. Megan put her hand to her face and began to cry. Not a cry of sadness, but something deeper, recognition, because at that moment she realized that she chose silence. He chose comfort. He chose not to defend me. She chose to see her husband as she wanted, and not as he was. "Dad, I didn't know. I didn't want to." Her words came trembling. Small. Too late. I looked at her with the same tenderness I always had, but there was something different now, a distance that she herself has built over the years. "I know, Megan," I muttered. "I know." Ethan, desperate, approached the table, resting his hands on the top as if he wanted to regain authority. "You can't do that to us. You would give. You promised. Then it does." "I never promised you," I replied. "I was going to give it away because I believed there was love, respect, and family. But now I see that there was only interest." Megan covered her face, sobbing. George walked away from his son. Linda wiped her eyes. The deck seemed smaller, as if the boat itself felt the shame that Ethan was pouring out on all sides. He took a step back, then another. "That's your fault." He pointed to Megan. "If you had talked to him, if it had shown that we needed it." But Megan didn't respond. For the first time, she was ashamed of him. And I realized there, that morning, in front of everyone, something that went through me like a thin and cold blade. I had not only lost my son-in-law, I had lost the daughter who allowed her love for me to be reduced to the size of her husband's convenience. And this pain, this was the biggest of all. But if you think Ethan stopped there, no. The desperation of a man who realizes that he has lost something valuable, and through his own fault, would still lead him to say something so absurd that it made the whole table fall silent in a different way, a phrase that made his true face clear. And this sentence came in the next part. She called me in a thread of voice. "Dad, can we talk for a minute?" There was no more strength there, only the urgency of those who try to put something together that was already in pieces long before that morning. We walked to the bow of the boat. The wind hit her face, ruffling her bun, and for a moment I saw her as when she was a little girl, her big eyes, seeking protection. But the woman in front of me was no longer that child. He was someone who learned to justify the unjustifiable. She took a deep breath before speaking. "Ethan, he is not like that. He was pressured with work, with bills, with everything. He acted on impulse. You know how he is." I let her talk. I let her fill the air with flimsy excuses, trying to mold her husband into something he never was. Every word was as if she was trying to save not only Ethan, but the very image he built to survive the marriage. "I know he messed up," she continued, "but he loves you, Dad. He just doesn't know how to show it." There was a long silence, the kind that doesn't ask permission. It only occupies the space. She waited for my answer as if waiting for time to turn back. But time, it does not come back. "Megan," I said at last, in a low but firm voice, "I played the strong woman you wanted to be. I lifted you up. I gave you study, opportunity, comfort. I taught you not to accept less than you deserve." She shook hands nervously. I continued, "And now you ask that I accept a man who destroys in silence?" Her eyes filled with tears at the time. "That's not it, Dad. That's exactly it." She took a step towards me as if to hug me, but I backed off. It was the most difficult gesture of my life, and even then, it was the only possible one. I saw the fright on her face and that shock of someone who realizes that he has lost the ground he thought was guaranteed. "As of today, Megan, I withdraw." She gasped in a sob. "What do you mean? Your life does not belong to me, and what's left of the man you saw as weak is no longer available." Her tears began to fall without disguise. Dad, please. But I just put my hand on the bow railing, looking out over the open sea, that wide, infinite water. It seemed more welcoming than my daughter's own blood. She tried again. I can change. I can do better. You can, I replied, but not for me. I won't be waiting anymore. And then she cried, not the cry of someone who had lost a privilege, but of someone who had finally seen the size of the void she had helped to dig. I didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Silence did the work that no words would do. She took a step back, her face marked with regret, and I stood there looking at the horizon, feeling the weight of an entire life that at that moment was breaking in two, before and after that conversation. But what Megan said next, that did cross me in a way I didn't expect, and it was this phrase, precisely this one, that made me understand that her wound was even deeper than mine. And that's what comes now. They stepped down from the bow in silence, each carrying a different kind of weight. Megan, the weight of guilt. Ethan, the weight of shame. I, the weight of a lifetime that has finally found its limit. I stood for a few seconds, looking at my daughter's back as she walked back to the deck. When we got close to the breakfast table, George and Linda were standing there, lined up like two pillars that never swayed in the wind. They both looked at me with a mixture of respect and deep sadness, but not sadness for me, sadness for what their son had become. Ethan tried to say something. Charles, I raised my hand, gentle but firm. Enough is enough. The words came out without anger. There was only an end to them. He still doesn't understand that when a man of my type says, enough is enough, the subject has no continuation. I'd like you to leave the yacht this morning, I said, looking him right in the eye. There is nothing more to keep, nor anything to fix, not even taps, nor relationships. Megan opened her mouth as if to beg again, but no sound came out. She only nodded slowly, as if finally realizing that there is no point in fighting against what is already decided. George sighed, heavy. Charles, I am deeply sorry. Linda put her hand on her chest. You didn't deserve this. I just smiled slightly. He no longer needed defense, nor consolation. As Ethan picked up his bags with sudden movements, as if the whole world had turned against him, Megan gathered her things in silence. She folded her clothes slowly, as if folding memories too. It was hard to see that, but at the same time there was a truth there that took me years to accept. Love is no excuse for cowardice. When they were ready, Ethan tried the last card, that typical attempt of those who have never lived with consequences. It can't end like this, he said, gritting his teeth. You won't just cut us out of your life. I will, I replied, and I've already cut it. Megan looked away, as if the sentence had gone through her chest. She took a step forward, and for a second I thought she was going to hug me, but she stopped halfway, as if he realized that some gestures only make sense when there is still a bridge. And ours, at that moment, had collapsed. I accompanied the four of them to the catwalk. The wind from the marina was blowing strongly, but my decision was blowing even more. Before they came down, I said the phrase they would carry for a long time, maybe for the rest of their lives. They don't need to look for me. This door closes without noise, but with weight. And then I turned my back. I didn't wait for an answer. I didn't expect explanations. I didn't expect anything. When we spend a lifetime waiting to be seen, there comes a time when we stop. I heard their footsteps coming down the walkway. I heard the dragging of the suitcases. I heard the awkward silence that enveloped the entire marina when they realized that this boat wasn't a rental, and that the old man they dwarfed was, in fact, the only one who had reached out all the way. I didn't look back. My father always said, whoever needs to look back has not yet finished leaving. And I had finished. The yacht's engine purred softly when I turned it on. A firm, clean sound, almost as if the boat itself understood what was happening. I climbed to the upper deck and let the breeze hit my face. For the first time in a long time, the air seemed easy, breathable, lightweight. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. If you feel that with me, like this video and subscribe. Let's make this story get where it needs to go. I stayed there, watching the marina getting smaller little by little, until it disappeared. And inside, in the silence of the sea, I knew this was not the last farewell. It was still necessary to face what came after the void, because when a man closes a door, you need to open another one, and the one I opened right after, it changed my destiny in a way that even I didn't expect. George and Linda stayed there at the marina after Megan and Ethan disappeared in the parking lot. I figured they'd go after them, but no. They remained on the pier unhurriedly, as if knowing that certain conversations can only begin when the silence has finished settling. George was the first to approach. He came slowly, with that way of a man who carries honor on his shoulders, not pride. "Charles," he said, in a heavy voice, "I want to ask for forgiveness on behalf of our family. You were disrespected." He didn't lower his eyes. He looked straight at mine. This has always been rare in today's world. Linda walked beside him and held my hand sincerely, not pity. "We've never seen you as weak. On the contrary, we always thought you were too good." Her "too good" came with a tenderness that I hadn't heard in a long time. It was almost as if Margaret was there, speaking through her. I took a deep breath. The sea rocked the yacht gently, as if encouraging me to speak after so long putting everything away. And I did. It didn't hurt, curiously. Perhaps because it was the first time in years that someone really wanted to hear it. You know, when Margaret was gone, I lost more than one wife. I lost my direction. She was the compass of this family. I felt my throat close a little, but I kept going. Everything I've done for Megan, for them, it was an attempt to leave something beautiful in her path. A symbol, a way of saying that even when I wasn't here anymore, she would have a place to lean on. Linda squeezed my hand tighter. George nodded, not breaking the respectful silence. "But I made a mistake," I continued. "I was wrong to confuse generosity with permanence, to think that money cures character." George exhaled slowly. "Charles, you didn't miss it. They were the ones who lost." He said it so firmly that it sounded like a verdict. A man can be betrayed, humiliated, diminished. But if dignity is maintained, everything that matters is maintained. I looked at Serenity's white hull, reflecting the sun. I thought that by giving them this boat I was uniting the family. But today I realized that gifts are only given to those who know how to receive. Linda tilted her head, looking out to sea. "And you did exactly what a worthy man would do." Their validation didn't come as cheap consolation. It came as recognition, the kind that life rarely gives when we need it most. I was silent for a few seconds. And I say this to you too who have heard me so far. Sometimes the value of a gesture does not appear in the lives of those we try to help. It appears in the eyes of those who understand the truth. That's why I ask you, stay with me until the end. The deepest moment of this story is still coming, and I feel like you'll understand exactly why. George took a deep breath, rested his hand on my shoulder. "If you need something, of anything, we are here." And at that moment I realized something strange. The moral embrace that I never received from my own daughter. It came from two people who were not even my blood. There is a family that is born, and there is family that life presents when you need it most. And sometimes it is the latter that remains. After a while of talking about everything, about what hurt, what broke, what still hurt without breaking, they said goodbye with eyes full of respect. A respect that does not require explanations or justifications. A clean respect. True. I stood there alone for a few minutes, looking at the footprints that were still on the deck. The wind passed me as if taking away the rest of the weight I was carrying. And as I watched the marina getting emptier, I realized that everything had changed that weekend. But maybe not the way I expected, because losing can be a path, not a destination. But there was something I hadn't told you yet, something I discovered hours later, and that completely changed the way I saw the future. A revelation that didn't come from Ethan, nor Megan, but of someone I never imagined kept something to say to me. And when that person spoke, it was as if a new page had been turned inside me. Do you know what that revelation was? Because that's when the story changes course, for good. I let go of the ties slowly, as if releasing an old thought that had been stuck inside my chest for too long. Serenity's engine purred softly, in a way that always reminded me of a deep, steady breath, as if the boat itself understood that this moment was different from all the others. I could still see the Newport Marina behind me, every pillar, every rope, every reflection of the water carrying a piece of that history I left behind. And for the first time in many years, I didn't even feel guilty, nor fear, nor obligation. I felt space, a space that seemed larger than the entire ocean. The brass compass, the one I bought with Margaret for our last anniversary, shone on the dashboard as if the sun had chosen to hit it alone. I approached slowly and ran my hand over the cold surface, as I always did. "We're still sailing, my love," I murmured, even though I knew the wind would blow my words away before they got anywhere. But at that moment, I swear, it seemed that she was there with me. I put on our music, that old song she liked to listen to in the car when we were doing the Pacific Coast Highway, early in the morning before traffic woke up. It only took the first chords for my chest to open in a way that I hadn't felt in a while. It was not sadness, it was liberation, because on that empty deck, without mocking voices, without crooked looks, without that invisible weight that came from the expectations of others, I realized that silence can be the most honest company we have. All my life I got used to carrying people, sometimes on my back, sometimes in my heart, thinking that my value came from that, to give, to sustain, to bankroll, to hold the world while everyone else rested on my shoulders. But there, in the open sea, I understood something that perhaps it would have taken me decades to accept. There is no honor in giving to those who do not know how to receive. The skyline was so clear that it looked painted. The tiller hook settled perfectly between my fingers as if my hand and the boat had been made for each other, and I was guiding serenity away, every meter leaving behind the echo of humiliation, ingratitude, and especially of the illusion that I needed to be accepted. It was strange to realize this so late but liberating. I didn't need Megan to come running back apologizing, or for Ethan to regret it, or for anyone to recognize anything. The clarity I felt at that moment was greater than any excuse could give me. The wind hit my face, cold, direct, honest, the way people should be, and I let him take what he still weighed. Anger, resentment, tiredness. I felt everything melt away in me like foam, and the further I advanced, the more the sea seemed to give way. Alone, yes, but for the first time, free from the expectation of others, free to carry what doesn't belong to me, free from trying to deserve the love of those who never knew how to love back. The truth is that we spent half our lives trying to build a house for our family inside our chests, and one day he discovers that if she doesn't want to live there, there is no gesture, gift, or sacrifice that forces her to enter. And that's okay. That's okay, because the other half of life, if we have the courage, can be used to rebuild the house, just for us. No locked doors, no empty rooms. I looked out to sea and took a deep breath. Now it's going to be like this, I thought, without fear of what I leave, no fault of what I choose. And for the first time since Margaret left, I allowed myself to imagine a future that depended on no one but me. Maybe I would go to Catalina, maybe I would go up to Santa Barbara, maybe I would take that entire route to Seattle that has always been our unfulfilled dream. But the truth is that, for the first time in years, I didn't have to decide right away. Freedom does not require haste, and while the sea welcomed me, I felt something that perhaps you know well, that peace that only appears when we finally accept what we deserve. And I deserved to breathe again. But before you think that this is the last page of my story, I can guarantee you one thing. There was still one last meeting, one last conversation, and one last truth that would completely change the course of the days to come. Do you know what it was? Because it is there, exactly there, that everything takes on a meaning that even I did not imagine that morning. I sat in the small box at Serenity as the sun began to descend behind the hills of Newport. The light came in through the windows like a silent gold, one of those that seem to warn that the day is closing a cycle. I took my logbook, that same blue-covered notebook Margaret gave me on our last Christmas together, and opened it to the next page. The pen was still in my hand for a while, because sometimes writing hurts more than remembering. But I needed to record that, not for the world, for me. I offered everything, I wrote, and when they thought I had nothing left to offer, they wanted to take away even the little that was left. The phrase came out heavy, almost an outburst of decades. And it was. I leaned my back on the seat and let my gaze wander around the box. The impeccable wood, the smell of the sea mixed with coffee that still came from the kitchen, the distant echo of the waves crashing on the hull. Everything there seemed to remind me of what I had built on my own, alone and in silence. I ran my hand through my beard and continued to write, slowly, as if sewing a wound with patience. There were so many small moments, I recorded, so many silences that I swallowed, thinking they were a sign of maturity. So many ignored gestures trying to believe that the family adjusts over time. So many times when I was diminished, and I chose to be silent so as not to hurt. The noise of the sea became firmer, as if responding to what I wrote. And I understood, right there, that life tries to warn us before the final breakup, but we insist on delaying the inevitable. Being too good almost cost me my dignity, I wrote. That sentence, that phrase stared at me on paper, and for the first time, I realized that it wasn't an exaggeration. It was true. Kindness, when offered to the wrong heart, becomes an open door for those who only know how to enter to destroy. And I had left that door wide open for years, thinking that love and sacrifice were synonymous. They are not. They shouldn't be. I closed my eyes for a moment and remembered Margaret's face, those eyes that always called me back to myself when I got lost. Her absence taught me a lot, but the biggest of all was this: no one deserves the piece of you need to continue living. I opened my eyes and looked at the page again. Silence can be a shield, I wrote, but it can also be a sword. Oh, and how can it? Silence is strength when used at the right time. It's the answer when the noise of the world tries to swallow you. It is true when the words of others are full of lies. I finished the last line calmly, without anger, without haste, without hurt. Just firmness. Because I knew I was no longer the same man who started that weekend thinking he would make a surprise to unite the family. I was another, more whole, curious even, as if I was finding myself again after years without seeing myself completely. I closed the diary with a simple gesture, but it echoed inside me like a chapter that closes completely. A whole man, and intact, not because nothing had broken me, but because that which broke me no longer has power over me. I took a deep breath and left the journal on the table, feeling a peace so deep that it almost seemed unreal. The boat rocked slightly, as a nod of approval, but as I stood up, something happened. A sound, a warning, a touch coming from the communication panel that I didn't expect to hear that day. It was a call, a voice I hadn't heard since before it all fell apart, and what that voice said to me when I answered changed the course of my story again. Do you want to know what it was? Because it is precisely there, at this moment, that the last missing piece fits. The call came low, hoarse, as if crossing a corridor I already knew. It was Megan's voice. He didn't come with shouts or with justifications. He came with a simple request. Dad, he only listens to me for a minute. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, and let her speak. She said she was walking back to her house, that Ethan hadn't opened his mouth since they walked down the runway, that the silence inside the car was the kind that exposes everything that no one wants to admit. He also said that he knew he had crossed the line, that he had left me alone, and that for the first time she was seeing the size of the shadow that she herself helped to support. I listened calmly, and when she finally finished, I responded with the only thing my heart could offer at that moment. Daughter, time heals, but he also teaches, and sometimes it puts us each on our own path so that we learn to walk without stepping where we shouldn't. I didn't promise a response. I didn't promise eternal rupture. I just gave her what I always gave, truth, and I hung up with the peace that, for many years, I didn't know how to feel. The rest now belongs to her time, no longer to mine. Hours later, already anchored near Dana Point, I went up on deck with a hot cup of tea. The sea was calm, taking a deep breath, as if it had also lived a long story that weekend. I stared at the candles in the distance and realized that for the first time in decades I wasn't carrying anyone on my lap. Nor guilt, nor obligation, nor the weight of proving value to those who never wanted to see it. George and Linda returned home with dignity. They texted me that if I wanted company they were around, but that they would understand if I preferred to be alone. Ethan faced what he had always avoided, his own reflection without applause. And Megan is where life has placed her, trying to make sense of her own silence. But me? Today I am here, entire, rooted in a piece of life that finally belongs to me. I have sailed a long way to discover something so simple. The dignity of the people is worth more than any inheritance they try to pay with contempt. And you know, the great lesson of all this came to me there, sitting on that deck, with the wind ruffling my white hair. We spend our lives thinking that to love is to hold tight, when sometimes to love is to let go. Release the expectation, release the weight, release those who don't know how to take care of it. And above all, let go of what hurts slowly, because slow pain is the one that makes you sickest the most. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that no one has the right to make you forget your own worth, not even those who bear your last name. To be good is not to be silly, and to be peaceful is not to be passive. A calm heart also knows how to close doors, and that's also self-love. And look, before I continue my way here at sea, let me thank you for staying with me until the end of this memory. It's strange, but it's beautiful to think that someone on the other side found a little bit of themselves in my story. Thank you for your presence. Really, if you can leave your like, for me it's like a hug like that that squeezes the shoulder and says, I'm here. And if you want to subscribe to the channel, I warn you, the door is always open, like an invitation to come back for the next coffee. Also tell me in the comments from which city you are hearing my voice. I like to imagine where my words navigate. And if you can, activate the bell. That way you don't miss out when the coffee is brewed again. Now, before you go, let me ask you something. Don't leave yet. Listen to the next real story that will appear on the screen. Each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. There's another experience waiting for you here on the channel. An incredible story. One of those that speak softly, but stay with us for days. Click there, and come with me to the next chapter of this life that we share in confidences.